All right, so today I wanted to talk about a big lie that is pushed by the climate zealots, the climate alarmists. This is something that probably most people believe too. And it's the myth that CO2 controls the climate. And this is from Patrick Moore, who is, again, a very good follow if you don't follow him. Um, he says heat spells are not new. The 1930s were often warmer than today when CO2 was about 300 parts per million compared to today's 417. CO2 is not the control knob of global temperature, it's the main food for all of life. And again, if you follow Tony Heller, who's also a very good follow, he points stuff like this out all the time. In that, if you look at the hottest days, the hottest years, the years with the worst droughts, the years with the worst floods, the years with the most hurricanes, most tornadoes, wildfires, they're all a long time ago, right? They're all a long time ago, right? If you look at the hottest years, it was one of the years in the 1930s, I believe, and it was just completely insane. Like, there is places, like, not even that were, there were places in the States that literally had like months of over 100 degrees. Like, that's just completely insane. It's just insane. And same thing goes for now too. Is that we've had a very hot last month. I mean, we did have some heat records that were broken here in Alberta. Um, we had a week of, well, not quite a week of very hot, and then we had the next week after that was actually fairly hot as well. So we've had a pretty good hot streak. Um, but it doesn't necessarily prove anything, right? Because number one, there isn't really a correlation, right? If anything, there's an opposite correlation. Now, again, the climate alarmists, oh, correlation isn't causation. Well, they're doing the exact same thing, and that they're assuming. And this is if you look into the climate alarmist, the climate zealot narrative, this is the thing that completely debunks their worldview. Is that their entire worldview is centered around the correlation causation fallacy, right? They assume that because CO2 has gone up over the last 150 years, and human emissions have gone up, that there's a correlation there, and it's the causation. The problem is that they don't prove that. They just assume that that's the case, right? And that the way they're wrong is that, well, I mean, if it comes to CO2 and climate, well, okay, well, like I say, how do you explain that the hottest years were not recently, the years with the most tornadoes were not recently? Same goes for droughts, floods, hurricanes, etc., etc. Um, Not to mention, there has been points in time to where CO2 has been significantly higher than it is right now. Not only that, there has been points in time to where CO2 has been significantly higher, and we haven't seen very high temperatures, and the inverse is also true, right? So it's very easy to debunk these people, right? It's very easy to debunk them, and they'll after you debunk them, they typically come back at you with, "Oh, you're not a climate scientist or whatever." But I mean, Patrick Moore is, I mean, he's not a climate scientist, but again, he has a BSc in biology, PhD in ecology. So if anyone knows what they're talking about, it's Patrick Moore. Again, same goes for Tony Heller. I think he's a geologist, so fairly knowledgeable as well. But again, the whole credentialism argument, they always pivot to that when you've already debunked them, because if they were right, they wouldn't make the credentialism argument, because the credentialism argument is only necessary because you've proven them to be wrong. It's the same. It's pretty much the same thing as when they call you racist or a sexist, because that wouldn't be necessary. Like, if you actually were racist or sexist, number one, it would be obvious, and number two, it wouldn't be something they pivot to, right? They never start out with that, or at least unless you completely debunk them off the start, or it's like a more prominent figure. But the fact that they always pivot to that, it's proof that they don't know what they're talking about. Now, you know, people say, okay, well, if they're just lying about everything, well, why are they doing it, and what incentive do they have to do it? Well, it should be blatant. And the fact that people even need to ask this question just goes to show why I don't really take them seriously. But for anyone still wondering, it's like, okay, well, if you understood what the being in the business of being a researcher, i.e., a climate scientist, well, half the job is convincing governments or convincing whoever to fund your research. Now, if it, if you have if you put out data, whether it's true or not, that shows that what you are researching is this massive issue that could kill off all of humanity, are you going to be more likely to get funding compared to if you said, yeah, it's not an issue, or it's an issue but it's blown out of proportion? Of course you're going to be more likely to get funding if you blow it out of proportion. So this is the thing, is that the climate scientists, speaking of incentive, have a very clear incentive to lie to people because their job is at least partially, if not entirely, dependent upon it. The governments have a very clear incentive to lie to people, and why is that? It's because the whole climate change thing has been used and continues to be used as an excuse to implement more taxes and more regulations. Right? I mean, in Canada, we have the carbon tax. Now, the carbon tax has been definitively proven to not reduce emissions. I mean, you look at the province of BC, it's had it since I think 2008 or 2009. It has had no effect, right? Absolutely no effect. And it has had an effect, but it's literally like 0.1%. It's like it's well below 1%. I don't know what the exact number is off the top of my head. Um, so again, we know it has no effect, but they're still doing it. And not only are they still doing it, they're increasing it every year. So if we have more than a decade's worth of data that proves that it doesn't do anything, but yet we're still doing it, and not only that, we're increasing the levels of it, there has to be another motive because the data very clearly shows it doesn't do what it intends to do. So what is going on? Well, what is clearly going on is that they're just using it as an excuse to tax people. Right? Because if they say we want to raise taxes, at least on normal everyday people, most people don't want that. But if they implement this carbon tax, all they have to do is lie to people and tell them that, oh, climate change is this big massive issue, and most people will support it because most people are too ignorant and naive to actually know what's going on. Right? So at the end of the day, this stuff is so easy to prove and debunk. It's not even funny, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that all climate scientists are bad and they're all lying to people. Same goes for the government. But again, the climate change idea is used entirely as an excuse to increase taxes, to increase regulations, and to basically push for further left-wing governments and a push to be further to the left, right? That is the entirety of what is going on, and because of that, I can't support it because it's being used for nefarious intentions. So anyway, I'm gonna leave it there. So if you like the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. If you haven't already, check out those links below. Follow me on those other platforms. Again, you want to donate, you can do that as well. Again, everything would be very much appreciated. So like I say, check out those links and stay tuned for more.